to Road Gang Radio with Jimmy Mack, Lindsay Lawler.
Give me a minute, y'all. I'm coming.
And you, because if you're listening, you're in the gang. Take it away, founding member Phone Master Dre.
You are a part of the gang because we are live from the Fastport Studios with new sleeves, new smiles, and Jimmy Mack.
Hey, Dre, good morning to you, my friend. I have to tell you, look, I love all of the shows that we do. This one, up to now, has been extraordinary. Talked to Bob Nuss about his kind of what I saw 30,000-foot view, and at the same time from the trenches of the history of trucking, and then to kind of turn it over to Lee Otto, a remarkable man of remarkable courage that he continues to practice in his daily life, kind of spreading the gospel of Sierra Delta. It continues, by the way, here on Road Gang Radio. We always try to keep Friday a little bit more fun, a little bit more feisty. This is a great story, by the way, both the story he tells and his own story as well. Thomas Cullen, the Honorable Thomas Cullen, is a federal trial judge and former U.S. attorney over in Virginia. He's an accomplished writer, by the way, and a very, very good one. He regularly publishes op-eds and essays for national and regional media outlets. He's been doing that for over the past decade. He graduated near the top of his class from William and Mary Law School and was recently honored as its 2024 Carter O. Lawrence Fellow. He's a native of Richmond, Virginia. He studied history and ran track at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, which recently awarded him an honorary doctorate. The book we're talking about, Charlie Man, is his first novel. And what it does is it's a coming-of-age story in the true meaning of the expression. A genuine coming-of-age story about the, slightly lost as a student, slightly lost as a human being, but pretty darn good at track and football and a whole bunch of other things. Charlie Stewart, his best friend Beau, and his high school crush Katie are at the center of this, and it moves through that dangerous liminal space of, you know this, Dre, the end of junior year, through the fateful events of the summer that follows, and into that what I would call the cauldron that senior year of high school can be. It is a novel of becoming. It is a novel for young adults, but it's one of those novels for young adults that actually crosses the boundary into being the kind of thing that all of us who have high school memories and days of glory gone, but also days of strife and struggle, to really check this out. I recommend Charlie Man for all of those fathers who have sons, for all of those mothers who have sons, and for all of those people who simply like good books. Judge Cullen, welcome and good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.
You're quite welcome. Let's talk a bit about this book because, you know, one of the things that I have noticed I'm an avid reader, as you probably can tell. I read your book. I'm an avid reader. And one of the more distressing things over the past 10 years has been a lot of young men are opting out of the reading space. Or are choosing to read technical manuals over fiction. The idea of what they used to call mid-brow writing that Ernest Hemingway fell into, that was accessible yet profound at the same time. There's not a lot of options for young men to read, and you've entered into a space where percentage-wise, the number of opportunities for young men to hear stories about themselves is declining. You've stepped into this. Was that any part of your consideration to give young men across the country an opportunity to read something that maybe that they would have direct access to?
So that's a great question. I think I'd be lying if I said I went into the project with that in mind as a goal. As I wrote the book and then went through the long and difficult process of finding a publisher and started thinking about marketing, I soon learned as part of that process a lot of what you just said, which is the precipitous decline in the number of particularly young men who read for pleasure. It is all too true today that the overall number of readers are declining for myriad reasons, right? Because we have a generation now whose lives revolve around their cell phones, and they get their news and their entertainment in little bits. They have shorter attention spans, and I think the market generally for readers over the last couple of decades has shifted, and there are very few authors who are writing about young men, have young men as protagonists going through experiences that are unique. and that a lot of us, as you said, remember fondly, that were difficult, and that I think are still timely. So as I sit here this morning, months after publication, I'd like to take credit that I was trying to step into that void, but that wasn't my intention going in. It's kind of a secondary benefit, I guess, to the project.
And by the way, that is the project. I mean, I mentioned Hemingway. I'm a big fan of the Nick Adams stories. I'm a big fan of A River Runs Through It, on another kind of vein. These stories of young men coming of age. A big fan of the fun stuff like Encyclopedia Brown when I was growing up as a kid. All of the kind of stuff that we just got finished talking with Dion Graham, who is doing the new audiobook version of Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles, and all of that stuff filled up my imagination as a young man, and I don't know where I would be without it. And I can't tell you the number of people who come to me. They can read. I don't mean they're not illiterate, and they're capable of reading, but it just strikes me the number of people who we have worked with on this show to get them into reading late in life. I would like to prevent ever having to do that again. I would like all people who actually love to read to learn to love to read earlier rather than later. At the center of this book, this wonderful book, which, by the way, guys, you should read it, and then if you have a grandson or a son, you should give it to them. And look, we want everybody to read this book, but there's a special place in my heart for this book as something as an entry to young men. Tell us a little bit about Charlie Stewart, who sits at the heart of Charlie Mann.
Sure. So Charlie Stewart, as you alluded to in your introduction, is a young man who, like a lot of young men, has strengths and weaknesses. In terms of weaknesses, he's a fairly mediocre student, although he's an avid reader and a good writer. He's going into his senior year, a mediocre athlete, not a great football player, a backup on the team. He's a decent runner in terms of athleticism. He does that better than anything else. But Charlie's dealing with a lot. He has a best friend named Beau Miller, who is Mr. Superstar, who is good at everything, natural athlete, a great student who doesn't have to study. He's very handsome and has lots of girlfriends, and everything goes right for Beau. So he's kind of Charlie's counter, but they have a close friendship, but it's also a fraught friendship, like a lot of friendships that we have when we're younger. And it has its ups and downs and its complexities, but the two are close. So Charlie goes into his senior year. He's going to play football, which he knows he ain't going to play a lot. He's got to go through the college admissions process, which was daunting in the mid-1990s and is even more daunting today. Charlie lost his father to cancer a couple of years before that, and he's still reeling from the effects of that. He misses his dad. And into the void step a number of coaches and teachers who become role models to him and kind of help him through the year, and Charlie confides in them, and they help keep him on the right path as he progresses through the year to graduation.
One of the things that the book does really well is because often when people look back through the filter of, what is it? Prejudice is a fear of a future that will never come to pass, and nostalgia is a memory of a wonderful thing that never happened. And one of the things about this book that while it does capture a lot of those days gone feeling to it, you really do a great job of reminding people that being a kid is tough, and that the cruelty of kids to other kids plays through this. And sometimes we get bad advice from people who mean the best for us as well. What doesn't get lost in this is that, it's not that we have to get back to an earlier age or a different time, but it's a feeling of the sense to remember that how we got to where we are, if we got to the other side whole, it's kind of remarkable that any of us do, because there are moments of breathtaking cruelty that only teenagers can do to each other. In writing that, did you find yourself wincing from time to time? Because I can't imagine that you just completely outlined this thing from beginning to end and didn't find surprises for yourself.
No question. So I'm often asked, are you a seat of the pants writer, or is this something that, in terms of formula and a rigid outline, The answer is the former. I had an idea for this book for a long time, and for a variety of reasons, never got around to starting the process. I knew how the book would begin. I knew Charlie Stewart would be the protagonist. I knew his best friend, Beau, would play a large role, and I knew that the book would be set in Richmond, Virginia, around the time that I was coming of age. But from there, in terms of the characters and the plot and how it developed, it was really organic. Once I had the first couple of chapters written, I just let those characters kind of take me through the year. And it was a remarkable process. I mean, I got so wrapped up in writing those chapters and thinking about those characters and thinking about Charlie and how he would struggle, ultimately how he would persevere, that it was cathartic for me because, sure, I was drawing on a lot of my own personal experiences. Certainly, I didn't have nearly the difficulties that Charlie did or face the number of obstacles that he did. But a lot of what he went through in terms of dealing with these friendships, first love, facing anxiety, and just dealing with life were familiar to the author. And as I kind of converted those experiences into prose through Charlie, I was revealing a lot about myself, particularly at that age, and how I saw the world, and how, as you said, how difficult being a high school senior is. And it was true then, and it's even more true today. And I think that's one of the cool things about the book is even though we're talking about the pre-cell phone and before the advent of social media, these challenges and experiences that teenagers face are timeless. They were true then, they were true well before that, and they're true today.
You know, one of the things as well, too, and by the way, for all of our friends out there, my co-host actually does a show of her own on Wednesdays called We Should Write, which talks about the cathartic power of writing. She talks to people who write for a living, whether it's songs or books or anything else, and one of the things that they focus on is writing as a cathartic exercise, not worrying about whether you get it published or not, or whether the lyrics turn into a song or the poem turns into a reading, but just kind of focused on kind of doing that sort of work. I have to tell you, I actually had a bad trigger. And by the way, my producer and I talk about triggers. When we say that word, we mean that's our problem, not the problem of the writer, not the problem of the speaker, things that just bring us back to a moment. I can't give away the details of the book. There is something that Charlie essentially walks in on that just had me just suddenly being 16 years old again and being heartbroken all over again. And it really kind of takes you back. And you, from what you've said, write in a really interesting way that you write down, which means you actually give your characters depth and then figure out who they are and then walk with them across the landscape of discovery, that you're kind of moving from the logical place to the next logical place and have to follow who they are as people and how they would react. It's almost like they're telling you the story. So there must have been times when you're like, I don't want to do this to these people, but it's the only thing that could possibly happen in this situation, right?
No, that's absolutely right. And you get to a point where is this too much, right? This poor kid. I remember I had a wonderful project editor who I worked with after I found a publisher and it was accepted for publication. And I spent probably 6 to 9 months rewriting and revising with her input. And I remember at one point I got a draft back and her comments in the margin, and she just remarked, I mean, this poor kid has been through so much that I think at this point, you know, we need to lighten the scene and instill a sense of optimism and a little more hope. So you had to, I guess I had to check myself at times because you do become overwhelmed with some of these challenges and experiences and emotions. And that scene you're referring to in particular, in writing that, I mean, I personally had a visceral reaction, right? Because we've all been there in one way or another, and you just want to crawl into a hole and die. And I'm glad that for you, even though it was uncomfortable, that you were able to kind of experience those emotions. That's good feedback.
Yeah, and the other thing is too is the fact that being a teenager is the first time we discover, well, hopefully if we've been raised in the right way, if we've had people who love us around us, being a teenager is the first time we really kind of discover and actually are able to articulate, well, I hope we can, what it means to feel isolated, to feel alone in your feelings, to feel that no one understands you. That's that great space of nobody gets what I'm going through. And it's only later on that we kind of get up to the point where we realize by being able to step outside of ourselves, oh, wait, everybody went through that. And I'm kind of curious if in fact, as you put this together, because Charlie feels very isolated at times, with people making efforts to reach out from time to time, but if in fact you began to feel the weight of that as you went through, because you talk about we talked about earlier, your editor saying, "Man, this kid has been through enough. Let's give him a little sunshine. Let's get some green shoots in here." But did you begin to feel that weight? And how, as a writer, do you power through that when you know you're doing what is logical to a character, but at the same time, it doesn't mean it feels good while you're doing it? Because writing should make us at some points feel good.
Yeah, no question. Parts of the experience were enjoyable. I fell in love with these characters. They became a huge part of my life. When I was done writing the manuscript, I was sad for several days. I missed being part of their world. So all of that, plays a huge role, and it's difficult when you care about your characters and you care what happens to them, to write in such a way where they have to go through the fire, right? You're connected to them, and they're almost like I'm a father. I have teenage children. You can't help but think, is this my son? Is this my daughter? And boy, I got to protect them and keep them away from some of this stuff that invariably they're going to face at one time or another as they grow older.
And you also have to imagine a world, by the way, this is established very early. This is all part of the preliminary stuff. You also have to establish a world and examine a world where a father figure is absent, and a good father at that too. The idea that, in kind of examining that, did that help give you any insight to imagine a world? I don't know if you know this, but after 9/11, David Edelstein wrote a really beautiful piece. The sports writer wrote a beautiful piece that every time he got on a plane after 9/11, he wasn't so much worried about his own safety, but that he had boys 9 and 12 years old at the time. And all he could think about was what the world would be like for them if he, in fact, left it. And I was kind of curious, as a father, you just talked about that. Is this my son? Is this my daughter? But as a father, it must have been a difficult process, too, to imagine a young man without a father present for them as well, too, right?
No question. And I was and am remarkably fortunate that I had a father who was more than present in my life as a teenager, who played an integral role in my development and instilling values and making me into the person that I am today, and as someone who is still among my best friends. So you take that away and just imagine what your life would have been like had you been at that formative age where you're so vulnerable and susceptible to various pressures. And it's almost unimaginable to me, but what I knew is that for a lot of kids, that's reality. Maybe not at age 17, age 18, but maybe in your 20s or your 30s. And that's in some respects tragic, but at the same time, there's an opportunity there to turn to other folks. And in the case of this book, a beloved English teacher, a track coach who goes above and beyond to check in on this kid and to step into the role of a father, someone he can confide in about the worst experiences of his life, and just listen to him and empathize and gently nudge him towards a better path. So there was tragedy, but also opportunity. And because Charlie had to go through it like that, unlike the author, I think he ends up being more resilient and empowered than most of us otherwise would be.
My mom is a lifelong educator. My dad, by the way, I have a very similar relationship to the one you described with your father. By the way, at 83 years old, I'll put it this way: they were both able to walk into a restaurant on their own wits and on their own legs. Last night, as we went to go kind of have dinner with him, and he asked me what I was reading, and I told him about this book. My mom said something really interesting. She said, she said, as bad as people dread the idea of their father being called down to the principal's office to talk about what you might or might not have done, she said, you know what's worse is when there's no father to call down there. And
absolutely.
And she says the gravity of that then hits the principal or the disciplinarian and the people in that school when there is no father figure to call, and the idea that, we are always searching for that lost father plays a role in this book too, because there's all kinds of plots. Coming of age stories have all kinds of plots. There's the things that happen, but throughout the book, we can see Charlie casting about, who is it that is going to be the mentor that guides me to the next place in my life? And that becomes one of the things that kind of percolates throughout it as well. Is it going to be, is it going to be this counselor? Is it going to be this teacher? Is it going to be these people at camp? Who, in fact, are going to be the people that guide me to my next place? And the idea of asking that of someone who is the same age of you is always a terrible mistake, because they're going through the same things you are, and they're going to break your heart. And I'm having a conversation as opposed to asking questions, but I was curious as to when you have that second brain, am I in fact writing this book, or am I now asking questions about the problem that I am laying out? Does that make sense?
It does. And I think it was more writing the book, but invariably you would reach a point where you're presented with a conundrum. You can go one way or another, and you've raised this issue to the surface, and you have to address it and confront it and deal with it. So that was an integral part of the process for sure.
The other thing is the fact that there are moments of breathtaking sunshine in this book. There are moments that towards the end, there's a fist pumping moment that really had me kind of galvanized. The other thing too is that, we forget how much of a role, even for those who aren't sure they want to participate, how much of a role sports at the center of everything plays a role in our identity in high school. And I was kind of curious in examining that. Does it give you pause that so many people's lives rise and fall, particularly teenagers, on these kind of defining moments? The idea that, in a different world, if Charlie was under better circumstances, a moment that happens towards the end of the book where that would be the thing that everybody remembers him for in this sort of, glory days vision of high school. But like I said, the other thing is that, we live in an era of cell phones now, and I was kind of curious if keeping cell phones, even though you've lived the plot in many ways, you and I both have lived this plot in one way or another, but if it's hard and difficult to kind of keep out what is now and keep it firmly grounded in the past, or if not having cell phones makes things a lot easier to kind of execute in this world.
So I think it made it much easier, yeah. Right? Well, first, the pre-cell phone, pre-social media era was what I knew, right? And so cell phones came about when I was in college, and the internet and social media at or around the same time. I can't imagine writing a young adult novel and having to deal with that is kind of an overarching structure, right? Given the fact that teenagers today converse almost exclusively through that medium. I don't know how you would write without having it to be unwieldy. The text communications and posting on Snapchat and just having scenes like I have in the book, where you're just sitting on the banks of the James River in late summer, sipping on a beer that you shouldn't have been drinking, but just having a 2-hour conversation with a best friend. Every era has its pluses and minuses. I would argue that coming of age before cell phones and social media enabled kids to socialize and mature in a way that I think is lacking today, and I think we're seeing that kind of manifest itself in this current generation and the one immediately before that. These kids are, and I have 2 of them. They're just as special as we were, but they're different, right? They're more fragile. They're not as adept at socializing and communicating and adapting. They're less resilient. So that world was anathema to me. My experience was so different, and I couldn't begin to write a book where you had to deal with these impediments to just normal human interaction.
There is a stand-up comic that I'm going to recommend to you just for one routine. His name is Des Bishop, and he falls in our age bracket. He's closer to mine. You and I are kind of in the same territory here. But what's really fun is that he said, I'm all appreciative of people practicing mindfulness. He said the benefit of growing up in the 70s, 80s, and the early 90s, he said, was you didn't have to practice mindfulness. You had to deal with it. He said, be kind, exactly. Rewind. It's like the idea that it's like, what did you do on the bus when you were going to school? You watched the condensation on the window. That's what you did.
Yeah.
And that was the reality of it. Judge, we don't have any more time. Our guest today is the author of Charlie Man, which is a coming-of-age young adult novel. Comes with the highest recommendation. Guys, you can just give it to any young person in your life that you feel needs this story, but I'd recommend reading it yourself and then maybe making some time to talk to a young man in your life or anybody who loves to read about what this novel is all about. It's great for all ages. Charlie Man is the name of the book. Judge Thomas Cullen has joined us this morning. Congratulations on all your success and continue to do the good work. Thank you, sir.